All right, welcome everyone. You're listening to What on Earth is Happening. I'm your host, Mark Passio. Today is Tuesday, June 15th, 2010. My website is whatonearthishappening.com. I guess I can briefly get into a recap of what we've done thus far and then jump into the topic for tonight, which is going to be a continuation of discussing the ongoing problem that the human species is seemingly trapped in. And a huge, huge part of that problem is mind control. So we're going to start to divert a little bit from talking about the types of factors and conceptual ideas and philosophies that we've been discussing over the last several weeks on this show, and we're going to get into a little bit darker waters and talk about what is perpetuating and keeping the problem manifesting for as long as it has been, which is that human beings are continuously creating a scenario, a manifestation, an experience that they do not wish to experience because it contains a large amount of suffering that is self-inflicted suffering that is not necessary to experience. And mind control is a dominant factor in any analysis, if it be an honest one, regarding what is actually taking place and what is driving these dynamics. So ultimately what we have done on this show up to this point is talk about the bottom line causal factors regarding why human beings suffer the way they do. That's what this show is ultimately about. And freedom, the concept, the notion, the very notion of freedom is all about freedom from suffering, freedom from unpleasant experiences. So what we have done is we have discussed causal factors, and the ultimate causal factor, the reason, the bottom line reason that human beings experience self-inflicted suffering. And this is not an overgeneralization. This is not reductionism. It's not oversimplification. There are really only two reasons that human beings experience self-inflicted suffering. It is because they accept into their belief systems that which is not true, and simultaneously they refuse to accept that which is true. Human beings are fooled and suffer only two ways. They refuse to accept that which is true, and they accept that which is false. So you can compress it even more and boil it down into one overarching dynamic: the ability to tell truth from falsehood and deception. That's it. Every other problem that we experience that is unpleasant for us, that contains suffering for us, is derived ultimately from that overarching dynamic. And there will be those who don't agree with that, who think that that isn't the case, and that's fine. But there are people who have studied this dynamic intently and intensely for many years. There are people who have written about this dynamic, who have, in their wisdom, tried to explain this to many other people so that they could avoid the pitfalls that we fall into constantly. And yet that wisdom is almost constantly rejected universally. But there are very few who do listen to it and have really been able to apply those principles and turn their life around such that they themselves do not inflict self-imposed suffering upon themselves. Again, one of the problems is we live in a quantum universe. We live in a universe that is driven by quantum dynamics, which means amount. So a very few people doing something can create an influence. But until there is a critical mass or a significant number of people that are changing their attitudes, that are changing their thought processes, that are changing their behaviors, it is very difficult when there is an immensity of people that are seemingly not changing, okay, and are continuing down this road of suffering, because ultimately we are all bound together. Ultimately we are all connected. There is no separation at the level of consciousness. As goes with one, goes with the whole, and vice versa. People think that if it doesn't affect me, many people think if it doesn't affect me, then I don't need to worry about it. It's something that I can ignore. And this isn't how it really works. Being that we are all connected fundamentally in consciousness, we are all universal energy experiencing itself. As one suffers, all suffer. So it's difficult to get to that critical mass point where enough people are willing to get out of old patterns of thinking and old patterns of behavior in the world and change such that the overarching dynamic of what is creating the shared reality of the whole changes. That's what we're trying to work toward by assisting people in changing their worldview, changing their fundamental way of thinking about how they operate in the world, how they interact with other people, how they treat other people, how they treat themselves, how they view themselves in relation to others. Because ultimately, again, if you understand what really is, you understand there is no separation, and as happens to one being is ultimately happening to you as well. It is only through our filters that we see self and other as separate things. Ultimately, they are the same in consciousness. That being said, one of the fundamental principles that needs to be acknowledged that is operating in the world is mind control. This is what keeps this new paradigm, this fundamental shift in the way people think from emerging. It is like a force that is constantly holding something down and constantly has to be applied. It's an applied force. And if that force were let off from the application point, namely the mind, we would see things dramatically shift very quickly. The problem is the forms of media that are out there in the world that most people are taking into themselves and making a part of them by what they are paying attention to are poisonous streams of information that are either based in pure ignorance or outright deception, knowingly. And I know that may be, a difficult thing for a lot of people to hear, but it needs to be said and it needs to be understood. And mind control needs to be understood. The methodologies of mind control, how it is used, how it goes to work on the subconscious, how it goes to work through patterns, through repetition, through symbols. We'll be discussing all of this. We'll be discussing multifaceted techniques of mind control. It's a war on consciousness, ultimately. That's what mind control is. And I've said on this show, and I'll say many more times, ultimately, what mind control is, at its fundamental level, is an attempt to exterminate the human imagination, an attempt to exterminate the ability for people to challenge the status quo because they cannot even envision or conceptualize anything being different than how it currently is. And if you destroy the imaginative capability of human beings, you have them exactly where you want them for as long as you want them there. That's ultimately what mind control is about. Before we go into the techniques of mind control, let's review the topic of magic versus sorcery that we've talked about in previous shows. So, magic and sorcery both, we defined in previous weeks as the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. The science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. Both magic and sorcery. And you're hearing a little bit of disturbance in the background there. My dogs are barking at someone outside. I apologize for that. I usually have them in another area of the house, but they're a little bit closer to the room where I'm at today, and I guess something upset them. So magic, the science and art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the will. So it's an influencing change. The will, in this instance, when we are referring to magic, is a capital W will, meaning the will of creation, meaning higher will. Okay? It is the will of the universe to progress and move forward in consciousness, in the evolution of consciousness. It is not an individual's will, lowercase w. That is the definition of sorcery, when someone is using a science or art, a set of techniques for influencing change to occur in accordance with their own will, a lowercase w will. Critical to understand the definition between those things, because essentially they're the same except for the connotation of the word will, whether it is a higher will or a lower will. So, there are, while that initially may sound like a Hollywood depiction, okay, you're talking about magic, you're talking about sorcery, magicians, sorcerers, as we've seen in a movie, for example, like Lord of the Rings. You know, you have a white magician and a dark magician. You have one magician who is trying to serve the force of good, one magician who is trying to serve the force of evil. In that movie, Sauron, the evil eye. Okay, so a sorcerer is serving his own egoic desires. That's what a sorcerer is doing. He doesn't care about the well-being of others. He doesn't care about evolution of consciousness. He is trapped in the dynamic of fear. He is trapped in the dynamic of confusion internally regarding his own emotions and evolutionary development in consciousness. And he is trapped in the desire, most of all, to control others. So to those ends, the sorcerer uses his set of techniques for influence to create the scenarios that he wants to serve his will, even if it means that other people suffer at the expense of anyone else. Because to the sorcerer, the suffering of others doesn't matter. Because the worldview that a sorcerer holds is one of complete separateness and not a unified worldview of oneness of all consciousness. So it's a critical distinction to make when we talk about the arts of influence, the science of influencing others. What people who are coming online to this kind of material and understanding how these sciences have been used. And that's what they are. They are sciences. They are sets of known techniques based in knowledge. That's really what magic and sorcery are. What the positive magicians, are the alchemists of the world, are attempting to do is to raise consciousness by making people aware of these techniques and making people aware of sorcery that is taking place around them in their world. And that form of sorcery, the main form of sorcery, the main tool, the main science and art that sorcerers in this world use is mind control. And again, as I've said, mind control is a war on nothing less than human consciousness. So the sorcerers of this world, those who are manipulating other people to get what they want, and I don't mean at a small scale, I'm talking about a global scale. The sorcerers of this world are small in number in comparison to the general populace, infinitesimally small, as a matter of fact. The very, very few are controlling the mass numbers of people in the world. And people will often say, well, hey, that's probably not possible. You would need a whole lot of people to control a whole lot of other people. And that's simply not the case, because people aren't being controlled so much in a physical sense as they are in a mental sense. Again, mind control is the tool that these sorcerers use. And as we will talk about, it has an incredible amount of techniques. There's not just one technique for mind control. There are many techniques for mind control. So this small cabal who is really controlling things are doing so through the art of manipulation. It's a subtle form of mind control. It works upon the masses of people. Because if you're controlling the information that people get to see and hear and read, and you're controlling the knowledge that is propagated through the vast portion of society, you don't even need to control it all. You need to control it at major points of distribution and interest, like the media, the mainstream media, newspapers, what goes out over television networks. Most people, unfortunately, not all, but most people, are still taking, believe it or not, the bulk of their information through outlets such as that, television, newspapers. Okay? These are owned largely by the same sorcerers and corporate interests that they control. They are the owners of a lot of these institutions, like the mainstream media. They work by artificially lowering the vibration of consciousness that people are operating at. They need to lower people's vibratory energy, the energy at which they radiate, the energy at which they operate on needs to be at a low vibration, because this is the vibration of fear. This is the manifestation of fear energy. Fear is a low waveform vibration, a slow and long wavelength, if you will. Okay? It is heavy. It is deep. They need to put people into states of fear so that they will buy into their manipulating efforts. Without fear being present in people, physical fear, fear of survival, fear over the future, monetary fears, fears over food, you name it, everything, lack-based fear-based worldview. There isn't enough. I need more. I need to do this. I need to have this. I'm not good enough. What will this person do? What will this person say? All fear-based mentalities, fear-based ideologies. This is the main form of mind control. Ultimately, all mind control is based upon this principle. The overarching principle that in order for a sorcerer to control, and by a sorcerer, again, I mean someone who is skilled in the science, the techniques of influencing other people to get what they want, to get them to behave in certain ways such that they prosper at other people's expense. The sorcerer, the manipulator, prospers at the expense of the people that he is manipulating, he or she. So that's the main thing to keep in mind, that this small group of controller sorcerers trapped in their own consciousness in the dynamic of fear. They're also in this dynamic. They're also in that energy. Their goal ultimately is to make everyone as miserable and cut off from true self as are they. And they can only do that by manipulating the consciousness of the masses of people into the vibratory energy of fear. That's the only way they could possibly get us to cut our own selves off from our true potential and our true understanding of who and what we are, and to get us to serve their agenda unknowingly in the vast majority of cases. So this brings us to, in any mind control propagation, in any methodology of mind control that is going to be used, you're always going to be using people who also who do not understand what your ultimate agenda is. So it will be like the blind leading the blind. It will be mind-controlled people helping to mind-control other people. Just think about it. You need people who are in ignorance to propagate something that ultimately can only create more suffering in the world, even for them. To get them unknowingly to cooperate with an agenda. This is done, and I'll use a word that I used previously when I started talking about trauma-based mind control, and it's very appropriate that this is how the system would work. They do this through something called compartmentalization. In addition to compartmentalization, which is walling off different areas of interest and different areas of influence from each other, such that the left hand does not know what the right hand is doing. Okay? That's compartmentalization. You hear about this in military operations. You hear about this in defense projects that are being worked on, being developed. They're compartmentalized. They may have one person working on the flight dynamics of a new aircraft while another person works on the propulsion system. But they never know what the ultimate design is going to be, look like, or how it's going to manifest until the entire operation comes together as a whole. And that, of course, is controlled from higher levels of awareness, people who have knowledge of what the entire project is about. The people who are actually doing the work on the ground to create that project may have no idea of what they're creating, because they're compartmentalized. They're walled off from each other. You could say there's a gulf between them, to play upon on what's happening right now in the Gulf. See, compartmentalization is a critical part of mind control, and it's a critical part of the structures that are taking place that are operating all around us in the modern world. So the second part of this structure, you could call this the manipulation structure, okay? The structure for mind control. It works basically the same way no matter where a compartmentalized project or a project that deals with the dynamic of controlling the mind of the individuals working in it. This structure always basically operates the same way. It works through compartmentalization, first and foremost, and it works through hierarchy. Hierarchy means that there is levels of the structure. As well as it being separated into different compartments that operate independently of each other, it is hierarchically structured. Okay, so mind control institutions are always going to be structured in two ways: hierarchically and compartmentalized. Those are the two basic features that, if something is set up like that, it is an institutionalized belief system. And ultimately, it is trying to prevent people from thinking outside of those institutional lines of belief. There are ranks and structure within hierarchy. Okay? So, a private is way at the bottom in the Army. And then above him, there are many ranks leading up to general and, 5-star general. So hierarchy has to do with how much knowledge is contained at a particular level of the structure, of the institutionalized structure. So as you go higher into the hierarchy of this structure, you reach higher levels of knowledge of the entire system. As you are lower in the chain of command, you are lower in the chain of knowledge. A general knows the battle plan of the entire operations theater. A private does not. He just follows his orders. A director of education understands the entire structure of the educational model that is being presented in schools, while the teacher simply teaches the curriculum that he or she is asked to teach, to do that job. The low-level employee in any given business or corporation has no idea about the executive decisions being made by the CEO and the board of directors. Knowledge is hierarchically structured in any institutionalized belief system, and it's done so for a reason. Because if you disseminated knowledge freely and widely and made it more similar to a round table as opposed to a pyramidal hierarchical structure that is compartmentalized, you would not be able to direct all of the energy of all of those people nearly as effectively as if you had centralized decision-making and centralized control over the people that comprise that structure or institution. So this works the same in any institution. It doesn't matter whether it's military, business, education, politics, religion. You name the institution. It is set up and it is structured according to these two basic principles: compartmentalization, walling off individuals from each other in the project, and hierarchy, meaning the higher you go, the fewer the people are involved, and the higher the knowledge that is contained by those few individuals. So they can pull strings from the top they make a decision at the command level, at the executive level, the CEO makes a decision, that decision is passed down and propagates down to all the way down to the most insignificant of workers in the corporation. It's a top-down hierarchical structure. In what is actually taking place on this planet right now, the top level of this pyramid I would describe as sorcerers, black magicians. Okay? These are individuals who have perfected the science and art of influence to create change in accordance with their own will, and could care less about the will of any other people, and certainly could care less about the will of creation. They want to profit, they want to prosper, they don't care who suffers. They are pulling the strings from the top up, sending their decision-making and their orders and their commands down to lower levels beneath them that often contain people that are well-intentioned and do not understand the agenda at the higher levels of the structure that I've described. They just want a paycheck, the people down at the bottom levels. They just want to go along to get along because, hey, I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to stir up trouble. I just want to keep my head down, make my living, have my house, have my car, have my food, and it doesn't make a difference what I'm a part of. Why should I rock the boat? I have it good enough. Well-intentioned people who have absolutely no idea, because of the compartmentalized and hierarchical nature of the structure they're involved in, of what they are being used for. And that's what these sorcerers, that's what these manipulators do. They use people. And when they can no longer use people for the agenda they want to use them for, they throw them away like a toy that they're done playing with, or a bone that they just picked clean. Because they don't care about other people. They only care about themselves. And they're not interested whether they just used up a person and basically tossed them aside when they were done with them. Doesn't matter to them in the slightest bit. The other thing that mind control works through, and the other thing that this hierarchical structure that I'm talking about essentially propagates its control through, is the occult. Now, there's a word that conjures all sorts of connotations with people. It conjures negative connotations. And there are reasons for that. And I'm not saying that those reasons are altogether not well placed. However, this is a word manipulation game that is actually played by the very sorcerers who are controlling things and who are manipulating people and events in this world. The word occult, connotatively in most people's minds, if you played a word association game with people on the street and you simply ask them, what is the first word that comes to your mind when I say the word occult? Occult, O-C-C-U-L-T. Just to be specific about the word so nobody is misconstruing what I'm saying here. The word occult, O-C-C-U-L-T. If you ask most people, your average person on the street, what does the word occult mean to you, or what word do you associate with the word occult? Almost invariably. Now, a few people will associate it with something different or random, or may not even know what it means at all. But I guarantee you, if you do this little word association game with most people. The word that they will most often associate with the word occult is the word evil. And again, there's a reason for that. When you look at the origin of words, and we'll be talking a lot about, I've already brought up this in past shows, but we will definitely be discussing the origins of many words and how in words there is great meaning that we don't traditionally ascribe to that word, that we don't understand because we don't know where the word came from, where it was derived from, its etymology, as it's called. The word occult, O-C-C-U-L-T, is derived from the Latin language, and it comes from a Latin verb, occultare, O-C-C-U-L-T-A-R-E, occultare. Now, if you take any Latin dictionary and you open it up to the O section and you look up the verb occultare, occultare means to hide or to conceal from sight, to hide from view. So, the form of that verb, occult, simply means hidden. That's all it means. The word occult means hidden from sight. Okay? Look at the word. Occult has in it the root of ocular, O-C-U-L-A-R, ocular, which means related to the eye. Oculus in Latin means eye. Okay? So occult, it's a form of the word that means eye. E-Y-E, not I as in me, the eye, the thing we see with, the organ we use to see, the eye. Occult derived from oculus. It means hidden from sight. That's all the word means. And that's critical to understand as we go forward into understanding mind control and occultism, sciences and art forms that are used to influence, that are largely comprised of hidden knowledge. Now, there's two main reasons people would wish to hide knowledge. The first has a positive intention behind it. But what I will say is that ultimately you still get a negative result. No matter how positive this intention is, it's misguided, it's misplaced. People who will hide knowledge for this reason do not understand a deeply an important principle of natural law. Okay? And the first reason that people will hide knowledge is they believe that knowledge in the wrong hands may be used completely irresponsibly or dangerously. Okay? I'll say that again. The first major reason that people will hide knowledge from others is because they believe that if they have certain knowledge, that they would use it in an irresponsible or dangerous manner. Now, that's a seemingly well-placed intention for hiding knowledge. However, it always ends up backfiring. It always ends up in some form in a disastrous outcome. And for occultists that may be listening to my words and may be listening to my work over previous weeks and in my presentations, take heart of what I'm saying. When you hide knowledge and you think of it as your own, you think of knowledge as belonging to you, and you may do what you wish with it, no matter how dangerous it may seem if it were to get into the quote-unquote wrong hands. You are going against a natural law principle that will ultimately only lead to further suffering and further degradation of consciousness. Get as upset about it as you want, because there are many people in certain occult orders and in acting in occult capacities that will get extremely upset by what I just said. And this is the reason I am no longer and never will be again at any time in my lifetime affiliated with any occult orders, formalized occult orders. Okay? I will not take an oath to an occult institution. I do not agree with hiding knowledge from anyone. And there are certain occult, even if they are positive in their intent, occult orders that will say, this knowledge is ours to protect. That's the thinking. They say, we're the ones who will mete this knowledge out to people that come asking for it. We're the keepers of it. Really? Well, I would suggest that's why the world is the way it is today. You're getting exactly what you created through doing this. This is the big failure in all of the ancient mystery school traditions. What they descended into was ego when they started believing erroneously that they, meaning this group of occultists, of people who have hidden knowledge in their possession, are the owners of said knowledge. They went into deep ego, seeing themselves as the owner of information. Really, you're the owner of information. And there are sacred people and there are profane people that we could never let have this information because of what they would do with it. This is, in and of itself, a compartmentalizing and a hierarchy. You're walling people off from each other, but most importantly, you're walling them off from truth, from knowledge of that which is. And you're creating levels or hierarchy or structure within an institution that has now come into being. We're the ones who hold on to this knowledge, and we give it out as we see fit to those we deem worthy. Even for such a positive intent as, God help us if this were to fall into the wrong hands. Sorry to break the news to you, it doesn't work that way in natural law. Because once you get into the thinking that you own other people, you own the knowledge that other people may get to see and hear, you're acting as the sorcerer. It doesn't make a difference what your intent was. You're acting as the sorcerer. The only way to truly ensure that knowledge that had a potentially dangerous application would not fall into the wrong hands, quote unquote, people who would use it in an irresponsible way. And I'm going to say something that when the people originally hear this, they may think, how could that be? I'll start this again. The only way that you can ensure truly that knowledge that may be, if used in the wrong way, dangerous and could be used in irresponsible ways, the only way you could ensure that knowledge from not falling into the wrong hands is to propagate it as widely and as freely as possible. The only way that you can ever ensure truly that knowledge that you feel might have a dangerous application would not fall into the wrong hands is if you propagate it as widely and as freely as possible. Because the structure of any institution that is going to use knowledge irresponsibly and dangerously is set up like the control of a sorcerer or the institutions that sorcerers work through. And that structure is always compartmentalized and hierarchical, which means the knowledge in it is not shared widely or freely. It is compartmentalized and it is controlled through hierarchy. The way that you ensure that knowledge will not be abused, used improperly, is through what I call the BitTorrent effect. The BitTorrent effect, if people know the program on the internet, on computers, it is a decentralized way of distributing information. It's not based on the old model of you have a central server that everybody connects to get a file. Well, what happens when the file is a hot file? And you have this method of, I'll put the file on this one server, and then I'll open up the doors for anybody that wants to come to get the file. Well, if the file's not really popular, not that many people want it, okay, you'll be able to do that fairly effectively. But what if the file is extraordinarily popular and everybody wants it? Millions of people want it. You know what's going to happen? Your server is going to get hosed. It's going to get, as they say, slash-dotted, okay? Your server isn't going to be able to deal with that kind of bandwidth of millions of people hitting it all simultaneously. So, people have worked around this problem, and they've come up with something known as BitTorrent, where somebody makes an announcement. I have this data. Want it? Sure. One person comes in. When they get a little bit of it, then they can give it to others. So everybody becomes both a receiver of that information and a transmitter of that information. And that is how you assure that one piece of knowledge or data does not fall into the wrong hands or does not become prevented from being propagated and understood by everyone. The BitTorrent effect. Well, this is what we need to be to combat what's going on in the world and to combat specifically mind control. We need to take as much information into us from a wide variety of sources and then re-disseminate that information widely and freely. Open sharing. This is a round table model. This is the BitTorrent effect model. Not compartmentalized and hierarchical. As I've said on this show, the information I talk about on the show does not belong to me. It isn't mine to hide from anyone. It isn't mine to wall off from other people. The universe is spoken into existence. Share knowledge as widely and freely as possible. That's how you ensure that it doesn't become used as a form of control. You don't have secret society networks and intelligence communities gathering all the important knowledge of the world and keeping it back from other people, which is what we have now. This is the degradation of original mystery school traditions that felt they had the right to hide knowledge from people. So, the sorcerers of this world operate through occult principles, hidden knowledge. That's the main factor to keep in mind. And it is structured hierarchically and compartmentalized like a step pyramid, with the highest concentration of knowledge at the top, and then those who are not familiar with the actual agenda of those at the top forming the base of the structure. The more you have, the farther down you go on the pyramidal structure, and the less knowledge is contained at that level. I want to read a quote by a researcher named Judith Moriarty. She described this hierarchical structure, an occult pyramid, if you will, with the very, very knowledgeable at the top and the ignorant masses forming the base in base consciousness at the bottom. She said that the greatest conspiracies of our world are not actually hidden. They are not actually hidden or occulted. They are just fragmented into different pieces, like a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle, right before our eyes, in plain sight. Think about that. What prevents us from realizing this structure and understanding the hidden knowledge that it works through is mind control. Which the question isn't how many people are under mind control. The real question we need to be asking is how many people are not under mind control. Because there are way, way, way more people in this world who are operating under mind control than whose minds are actually free and clear of externally imposed influences and erroneous belief systems that they are completely attached to. And I think we've done a decent job covering the structure of hierarchy and how the occult basically works through hidden knowledge. Next week, we will go in depth into some mind control methodologies and techniques. So that's all the time we have for this show. Thanks, everyone, for listening. See you here next week, Tuesday at 8 p.m. I'm Mark Passio. This has been What on Earth is Happening. Good night, everyone.